The music at the party was loud, the lights were warm, and the house was full of people laughing and talking. Emily Carter stood in the center of the living room with a glass of wine in her hand, smiling confidently as she told another story about her husband. Her friends were gathered around her, listening with amusement. Emily enjoyed moments like this. She loved being the center of attention. And tonight, like many other nights, Daniel was the subject of her jokes. Across the room, Daniel Carter stood near the window, quietly watching the city lights outside. He held a glass of water, not wine, and kept his shoulders relaxed. He could hear Emily's voice clearly, even through the noise of the party. He didn't need to turn around to know she was talking about him again. "Oh, Daniel?" Emily laughed loudly. "He's the calmest man alive. If there was a competition for the most boring husband, he would win every year." Her friends laughed. One of them, Sarah, asked jokingly, "Really? He looks so serious. Is he always like that?" Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "You have no idea. He never argues, never complains. If I told him the sky was green, he would probably agree just to avoid a conversation." More laughter filled the room. Daniel heard every word. He didn't react. He simply took a slow sip of water and looked down at the floor for a moment. It was not the first time Emily had joked about him like this. In fact, it had become almost normal. 8 years of marriage had taught Daniel something important, and we enjoyed control. She liked to lead conversations, make decisions, and feel admired by others. And Daniel, who hated conflict, had spent years letting her have that spotlight. But sometimes silence is misunderstood. Emily believed Daniel stayed quiet because he was weak. She believed he simply lacked the courage to stand up for himself. What she never realized was that Daniel had chosen peace over pride. Daniel was not a loud man. He never had been. Even as a child, he preferred listening more than speaking. He enjoyed building things, solving problems quietly, and watching people rather than competing with them. That personality had helped him become an excellent architect. His mind was full of ideas and designs, but he rarely bragged about his achievements. He believed work should speak for itself. Unfortunately, Emily had never taken the time to listen to that silent language. Another burst of laughter echoed from the group around. Daniel finally turned his head slightly and looked at her. She looked beautiful tonight. Her long dark hair rested over her shoulders, and her red dress made her stand out in the crowded room. She looked confident, lively, admired. Daniel remembered the first time he saw her, 8 years ago. She had walked into a small art gallery where Daniel was attending a design exhibition. She had been curious, bold, and full of opinions. While others quietly observed the paintings, Emily asked questions, debated ideas, and made the room feel alive. Daniel had been fascinated by her energy. She noticed him standing near one of the displays and asked his opinion about a modern sculpture. That conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end of the night, Daniel felt something warm growing inside his chest. Emily's spirit felt exciting, unpredictable. It's like a bright spark in a quiet world. They started dating soon after. In the beginning, Emily admired Daniel's calm personality. She said his quiet confidence made her feel safe. She loved how patient he was when she spoke passionately about her dreams. Back then, Daniel's silence felt comforting to her. But people changed slowly over time. Emily's ambitions became larger. She wanted success quickly. She tried different careers: marketing, fashion blogging, event planning, but none lasted long. Each time something failed. She became more frustrated. Daniel supported her every time. He never criticized her choices, but Emily started noticing something she didn't like. Daniel never seemed desperate for attention or approval. He simply focused on his work and continued building his career steadily. Without realizing it, Emily began comparing their lives. Her path felt uncertain. Daniel's looked stable. Instead of appreciating that stability, Emily slowly turned it into a target for her frustration. The teasing began gently. "You're too serious," she would say with a smile. Then the jokes became sharper. "You're too quiet." Eventually, Those jokes turned into small public humiliations. Daniel doesn't know how to argue, she would say in front of others. He would lose every debate in the world. People laughed, assuming it was playful teasing between spouses. Daniel always smiled politely, but inside, each joke left a small bruise. Back at the party, Sarah glanced toward Daniel standing alone near the window. "He seems nice, though," said Dot. Emily shrugged, double quotes. "Oh, he is nice. Too nice, honestly, sometimes I think. He would let someone steal his wallet just to avoid a fight." Another wave of laughter followed. This time Daniel slowly closed his eyes. For a brief second, something inside him felt tired. He had tolerated these moments for years because he believed Emily would eventually notice his patience and appreciate it. But tonight, something felt different. Not anger, not sadness, just exhaustion. He walked quietly toward the kitchen to refill his water. The bright laughter from the living room followed him like an echo. The kitchen was quiet and cool. Daniel placed his glass under the faucet and watched the clear water fill it slowly. For a moment, he allowed himself to think about something he rarely thought about. What if he simply stopped accepting this treatment? The idea felt strange. Daniel had never imagined confronting Emily seriously. Conflict made him uncomfortable. But another thought followed. What if staying silent had allowed this behavior to continue? He leaned against the counter and took a slow breath. From the living room, Emily's voice rose again. "And the funniest thing about Daniel," she continued loudly, "is that he actually thinks he's helping when he gives advice about work." More laughter. Someone asked, "What does he even do again?" Emily waved her hand casually. "He designs buildings or something. Nothing exciting." Daniel stood still. For the first time in years, those words didn't just hurt, they made something shift inside him because Daniel knew the truth. The truth was that several of his designs had recently won professional awards. His latest project, a modern cultural center downtown, had been featured in architecture magazines across the country. People in his industry respected him deeply. But Emily had never asked about his projects long enough to learn those details. Daniel had tried to share his excitement many times. Each time she interrupted or changed the subject. After a while, he stopped trying. He returned to the living room quietly. No one noticed him walking behind the group. Emily continued speaking. If Daniel ever tried to lead anything, it would probably collapse in 5 minutes. The room filled with laughter. Again, this time Daniel didn't smile. The silence from him was so noticeable that Sarah suddenly glanced back and realized he was standing there. "Oh, Daniel," she said awkwardly. "We were just joking." Emily turned around. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Something in Daniel's expression made her pause. It wasn't anger, but it also wasn't the usual gentle patience she expected. It was something calmer, stronger. Daniel simply said, "Excuse me," and walked past them toward the hallway. The conversation slowly restarted behind him, but the laughter was weaker now. An hour later, the party finally ended. Guests said their goodbyes and stepped out into the cool night air. Emily closed the door and stretched her arms. "That was fun," she said casually. Daniel didn't respond. He was sitting at the kitchen table under the soft yellow light above it. Emily noticed the silence and walked into the room. "You're quiet tonight," she said, opening the refrigerator. Still no answer. She turned around and looked at him more carefully. Daniel's posture was straight, his hands folded on the table. His face looked calm, but his eyes seemed distant. "Did something happen?" she asked. Daniel looked up slowly. For a long moment, he simply studied her face, as if seeing something he had missed for years. Emily felt slightly uncomfortable under that quiet gaze. Then, Daniel asked a question she had never heard from him before. "Emily, why do you treat me like I don't matter?" The room became completely silent. Emily blinked. Surprised, the question was simple, but it felt heavy. She opened her mouth to answer, but the usual jokes didn't appear. Because for the first time in 8 years, Daniel wasn't smiling when she mocked him. He wasn't ignoring the problem. He wasn't changing the subject. He was finally asking for the truth. And Emily suddenly realized something unsettling. She had no idea how to respond to a husband who was finally ready to stand up for himself. The morning sunlight streamed softly through the windows, painting the kitchen in warm gold. Emily Carter yawned and stretched, expecting the usual sound of clinking dishes as Daniel prepared breakfast. But the kitchen was empty. No smell of coffee, no toast popping from the toaster, no quiet hum of his music. She frowned, confused. Daniel was normally here early, making breakfast quietly before heading to work. His small acts of care had been constants in their home for years. But today, there was nothing. Only silence. Emily wandered through the house, calling his name softly. No response. She checked the living room, then the study, and finally the hallway. That's when she noticed his briefcase missing, his keys gone. Daniel had left the house earlier than usual, but there was no sign of him making coffee or breakfast. Emily's stomach sank slightly. Something felt off. She had grown so used to taking his quiet care for granted that its absence made the house feel cold. Hours passed slowly. Emily tried to focus on her own work, but found herself distracted. She kept glancing at the clock, wondering when Daniel would return. Every small sound outside made her think of him walking through the door. Something in her chest twisted uncomfortably. She couldn't place it at first. But deep down, she knew that his behavior had changed. For years, he had bent toward her needs, always patient, always calm. But today, the usual comfort of his quiet presence was gone. When the clock struck 7, Emily heard the front door open. She rushed into the living room to find Daniel standing there, calm, composed, and dressed neatly for work. His shirt was ironed, his shoes polished. He looked different, somehow more purposeful, more distant. Emily tried to greet him casually, asking about his day. He responded politely, his voice even but brief. Something about his demeanor felt deliberate. He was no longer the man who would try to please her constantly, bending around her moods and jokes. Emily's mind raced. For years, she had believed Daniel lacked ambition, that he was weak and unremarkable. She had joked about him publicly, teased him, corrected him in front of others. She had laughed at his quiet nature, convinced that his silence was proof of weakness. But now, standing before him, she realized she had never truly looked. Not really. She had assumed she knew him. She had been wrong. Curiosity tugged at her. She remembered that Daniel often worked on architecture projects late at night, showing her small sketches and ideas only to have her dismiss them. She had teased him, changed the subject, or laughed at his enthusiasm. She had never asked for details. She had never celebrated his achievements. And now, something about his quiet confidence made her realize she might have missed years of knowing who he truly was. Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table while Daniel reheated a small dinner. He didn't ask about her day. He didn't seek approval. He simply ate, measured, deliberate. She felt an unfamiliar tension in the room, an invisible line drawn between them. Daniel had not raised his voice. He had not made accusations. He had simply stopped bending toward her expectations, and that silent shift carried more weight than any argument they had ever had. Her thoughts drifted back to small memories she had long ignored. The late nights when Daniel stayed up helping her with her projects. The times he waited patiently while she vented frustrations about her job. The gentle smiles he gave when she snapped at him. All these moments had been ignored, overlooked, mocked even. And now she saw them differently. She had laughed at his patience. Yet that patience had always been a testament to his strength, not his weakness. Unable to resist, Emily decided to check his office work online. She opened her laptop and typed his name into a search engine. The results shocked her. Daniel's work had been published, featured in prominent architectural magazines. He was the lead architect on projects she had never known about. Cultural centers, office towers, and public spaces celebrated for their modern, elegant design. People across the city admired his work. Investors, journalists, even other architects spoke highly of him. The quiet man she had, dismissed and mocked for years, had been building a remarkable career while she had focused on fleeting ambitions and temporary frustrations. Emily scrolled through images of Daniel at events, shaking hands with colleagues, receiving awards, speaking with confidence to reporters. He looked different than the man at home, strong, confident, respected. And yet she knew he had always been capable of this. He had simply chosen not to flaunt it, choosing instead to remain quiet, to prioritize love and patience over pride. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She had spent 8 years belittling a man the world had quietly admired. She felt a sharp pang of regret. Later that evening, Daniel returned home after a long day. Emily sat in the living room trying to process everything she had seen. He walked in, calm, collected, carrying a small bag of groceries. No apologies, no explanations, just a quiet composure. He greeted her politely and placed the bag down. For the first time, Emily noticed a subtle shift in his behavior. He no longer sought her approval. He no longer attempted to smooth over every disagreement. He was present, composed, and self-assured. And it made her feel both unsettled and fascinated. Emily tried to start a conversation, asking about his day. Daniel responded, but his answers were measured and succinct. He no longer engaged in the small performances that had been part of his routine with her. The room felt heavy with unspoken words. Emily realized that she had taken his patience and quiet kindness for granted for years, believing it was his weakness rather than his strength. Now she felt the weight of her own actions pressing down on her. Finally, she spoke carefully, her voice low. "Daniel, why didn't you tell me about your projects?" She tried to mask the curiosity with casual interest, but the vulnerability in her tone was unmistakable. Daniel looked at her calmly. "I tried many times," he said softly. "Many times, but it didn't seem like you wanted to listen." His words were simple, but they carried years of restrained frustration and unspoken pride. Emily felt a shiver of realization. She remembered those moments when he had shown her sketches, explained designs, shared his excitement. She had interrupted, dismissed, or ignored him every time. And now, seeing the full picture, she understood that she had unknowingly hurt him repeatedly. Her heart ached at the thought. How could she have been so blind to the man who had loved her so quietly and consistently? The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Daniel placed his fork down and looked at her. "I never needed you to admire me," he continued, voice calm but firm. "I only hoped you would respect me." His words struck Emily like a lightning bolt. Respect. She had given him attention, even laughter, but had she ever truly respected him? She realized the truth. Her teasing, her mockery, her jokes in front of others had undermined him, making him feel small despite all his achievements. Tears threatened in her eyes as she considered everything Daniel had endured quietly. 8 years of love, patience, and restraint. 8 years of standing by her, supporting her dreams, and giving her the freedom to speak her mind, even at the cost of his own pride. She felt a wave of guilt and shame wash over her. How had she overlooked this remarkable strength? How had she thought silence meant weakness? Daniel watched her quietly. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to be. He simply let the truth hang in the air, letting her realize it on her own. Emily felt the weight of every moment she had ignored or mocked him, and it was overwhelming. For the first time she felt small, not in a cruel sense, but in the face of the quiet dignity that he carried with him. He had given her love without conditions, patience without complaint. And now he was showing her the power of restraint. Hours passed in silence. Emily remained at the table, processing everything she had learned. Daniel eventually moved to the study to review some papers, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She reflected on the laughter at the party, the jokes in front of friends, the dismissals, the interruptions. Every memory now carried a new weight, a sharp reminder of her blindness and her pride. She understood, painfully, that Daniel had been more than she had ever imagined. He had been a man of strength, wisdom, and quiet courage, all hidden behind his calm demeanor. By the end of the evening, Emily realized something crucial. She had spent 8 years misunderstanding the very person she claimed to love. She had measured him by loudness, by reactions, by attention seeking, and had failed to see his depth. Daniel's silence, his patience, and his steady love were not weaknesses. They were the hallmarks of someone who had loved deeply, wisely, and unselfishly. And now, for the first time, she feared what would happen if she continued to take him for granted. When Daniel finally returned to the living room to gather his things for the night, Emily looked at him with new eyes. He was calm, collected, and yet stronger than ever. His presence alone commanded respect. She felt a flutter of something unfamiliar admiration. Maybe even love rekindled in a quiet, profound way. The man she had mocked and underestimated for so long had become someone she realized she could never take lightly again. That night, Emily went to bed with a restless heart. She kept replaying the day's events in her mind. The empty kitchen, the quiet composure, the online search that revealed the truth, and the words he had spoken. She understood that everything had changed.